On this episode of the show, I have with me Andy Beam. He is CTO at Lila Sciences, and we're going to be talking about balancing diverging thoughts. So there's a lot of innovation going into areas that are currently unknown, leveraging AI, around AI. We're going to be talking about how do scientists balance that, the need to be methodical, improve things, and having a lot of free thinking, and how does AI integrate within the lab experimentation invention world. And I know there's a lot of new material being worked on, so there's a lot of different impacts AI is having. We'll be talking about a little change management, speed of innovation. Hopefully we get as much as we can in with you, Andy. Thanks for joining the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right, before we dive in, can you tell us what Lila Sciences does?
Yeah, so I'll try and keep this brief, but it's a little difficult given the sort of unique stuff that we're working on. So Lila is a new kind of AI company. And it's an AI company that is specifically focused on creating AI for scientific discovery. And we have like a very unique thesis on why you need an experimental platform to be able to do that. So I think we all know that like AI, like large language models and generative AI, have become wonderful productivity tools for all of us. They have read every paper that has ever been written. They have read every forum post on any topic that has ever been written. And they've consumed essentially the whole of human knowledge. So you might think that that's like a great thing to do science with. But what you learn as a practicing science over time is that the scientific literature is not a record of facts from which one can deduce new conclusions. It is a record of a debate. And in that debate, there are disagreements. There are pieces of information that are left out or only partially described. And so even if you've consumed the entire scientific literature, you really only have a starting point. And what you really need to be able to do is to break all of the ties that are in the scientific literature. You need to be able to decide hypothesis A was right and hypothesis B was wrong. And really the only way to be able to do that is with an experiment. And so what we're doing at Lila is really taking best in class AI models that others have trained and that we are training ourselves and pairing that with a scaled platform for experimentation where AI can run the entire scientific method itself and push scientific knowledge forward.
Awesome. I mean, there's a lot to unpack, and we'll hopefully get through as much as we can with you. Obviously, you mentioned innovation and trying to invent and try to come up with new things. I mean, that is pushing us into use cases of AI into the unknown. Maybe help us understand when it comes to the way the world was, right? Because I think not everyone maybe is familiar with the process outside of what you guys are doing at Lila. But if you were to contrast the way things had been for the past, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, however long, and now with the introduction of a technology like AI, talk to us a little bit about what's changed, what's different, and whatnot.
I mean, science is largely a process driven by serendipity, where some person has to be in the right person, or sorry, has to be in the right place at the right time, had the right thing for breakfast, and be surrounded by the right people in order to make a discovery. And the history of science is full of these types of serendipitous moments. But we haven't really been able to engineer discoveries like we're being able to engineer them now. So what we really want to do is take the process of discovery from this process of serendipity to an engineering process. And we want to be able to do that engineering process at scale. And we actually think that AI is just the key ingredient to be able to take science from a process of serendipity to a process of engineering, where we can now start to sort of radically invent new things at a pace and scale that we haven't been able to before.
I love that. I love the way you put that. Actually, it's funny you mentioned that. I actually like to sometimes. I have a daughter, and I like to joke with her and go, how do you think somebody invented the idea of cooking meat? And we kind of go through it. And I'm like, it's got to have been accidental. Somebody probably just dropped it into the fire and didn't want to go hungry. They picked it up. I'm like, oh, this tastes better. I don't know. Obviously, I'm just
And so many things are like that. And like thinking about like beer and wine, the reason why wine is the oldest spirit is because it's self-fermenting, that there's yeast on the skin of grapes, and someone left the grape juice around too long and it turned into wine, and they're like, hey, this is great. Let's have a party, like, and so there are like lots of non-obvious things that are the result of like being in the right place at the right time. we've standardized that process and we call it the scientific method, but we haven't scaled that process. And so
Absolutely.
I think that scaling the process is really where the magic is. Everything that we've seen in AI for the last decade is the result of scaling relatively simple processes. Time and again in AI, what we've seen is that when you scale things, magic happens. And so scaled scientific discovery, we think is also going to be this magical process.
Absolutely. How do you so scaled scientific process that's gonna help us discover things that we previously hadn't. Up to now, everyone's been used to this just perfect alignment of stars to discover something. Don't want to call it accidental, but we'll call it fortuitous coincidence of events. When you think about the scientific community in the way that it has been thinking, the way it has traditionally been thinking, that kind of free thinking, coming up with ideas, testing, tinkering, a lot of those don't come to fruition. And you're talking about a way of scaling what scientists could potentially start examining. That seems to be a bit of a shift from what somebody might be used to. I guess talk to us a little bit about the actual shift of if I am a scientist and I've been used to working a certain way, you're telling me AI is going to let me work a little bit different way. What is that? What is that difference for them?
Yeah, let me give you a concrete example from like my own life. So I'm a computer scientist by training. My bread and butter is implementing and testing ideas in computer code. So I have a new idea, get behind the keyboard, prototype it out, and see if it works. And there can be kind of a almost macho culture around programming, which is like a funny thing to say, which is like you can be a hardcore programmer and pass all of these hard programming tests. And a lot of people's ego is kind of wrapped up in how good of a programmer they are in certain corners of the tech world. That has radically shifted over the last 5 years in a pretty profound way. Now, when I sit down to write code, I don't just start typing out Python code. I actually fire up what's called a copilot that is kind of like my thought partner and it's powered by an LLM. And instead of like going immediately to computer code, I actually go back and forth with my copilot several times before any code is written. And often that copilot like does the initial draft of the code for me and then I review it. And it's almost to the point now where like if I'm on a plane and I'm trying to get some programming done and I don't have internet access and I can't use a copilot, it's almost like I have phantom limb syndrome. Like if you know what that is, like I keep waiting for the model to complete the code for me, but it never comes. And so it has fundamentally changed, rewired my brain for how I write computer code. It has made me significantly more productive. There are projects now that I accomplish over a weekend that previously would have taken me months to do. And I think that almost all of us, including scientists, are due for this reorientation about how we think about our work and what sort of our main intellectual contributions to a given project is, where we're now operating at a higher level of abstraction. We're thinking about plans and concepts, and a lot of the low level details are we sort of hand those off to the AI. And for scientists, this may feel a little disorienting at first. I think that uh, some things will be easier to automate for the scientists. Like I don't think a lot of people enjoy pipetting, which is like very labor intensive, transferring liquids from one vial to another. But I think we're gonna sort of reimagine sort of our role in scientific discovery, and it's going to be much more of this human machine hybrid where we're kind of like operating at a new level of abstraction that's much more conceptual than detail oriented, which is how it's been done before.
That's interesting. I guess, and again, maybe some of the audience isn't aware of the inner workings of scientific research in the lab. And if you're looking at the product as you described it, kind of the evolution of where AI can help and help scale, and we also talked about the fact that a lot of serendipity around inventions. How does that actually change? And the reason I'm asking that is it more ideas can be tested faster? Is it we will have AI discover some of those serendipitous moments for us that we can't even imagine? Is it going to help cause some of those moments for us? I guess, can you maybe talk a little bit about how the AI is actually going to translate to faster speed of innovation?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple different levels that you can think about this on. I think one thing that is maybe not obvious to like non-scientists is that speed and intelligence are kind of a fungible currency between each other. And so if you can test a million ideas in a day versus testing one idea in a day, you can actually make discoveries faster than you would have like been able to otherwise. And so one way to think about how AI is going to change scientific discovery is imagine that you had, a million of the world's best scientists in a given domain, all working in tandem, all working around the clock, all working without any of these sort of interpersonal dynamics that tends to go with, super high achieving scientific personalities. So imagine like that workforce working around the clock on with state of the art equipment. That's like a very, I think, obvious way that AI is going to rapidly change the pace at which we make scientific discoveries. Is essentially we'll just be able to clone, Einstein and get a million of him and have him work around the clock. I think the thing that's harder to predict though is, or the thing that's maybe like more counterintuitive is how that compounds over time. And we have this sense of the pace at which scientific discoveries are made. Every decade or something, there's a big breakthrough. But if you actually have this, massive AI workforce doing science 24/7, you get these massive compression in timelines where now it's not every decade. At the beginning, it's every 5 years. And then the year after that, it's every 1 year. And then 6 months after that, it's every month. And you just get this compound interest effect where all of a sudden we've reached forward and pulled the future into the present, 100 years before we would have gotten there before. So that's when people, I think, will start to feel it more viscerally, not when, we have the first AI discovered de novo drug that gets FDA approval or something. It's going to be like, oh my goodness, we're getting these breakthroughs on like a near weekly basis. Something has really changed.
Interesting. I guess if you're looking at, and you mentioned obviously things are going to happen on faster cycles. When you look at the overall, I guess, research community, and you were looking at the change management required for them to adopt AI, is it a case of people are going, this is great, that I can't wait? Is it a case of, hey, this is a big shift, I don't still trust the tech? What are you seeing from the adoption and change management perspective?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, in a previous life, I was a professor at a medical school and I watched the physician workforce go through very similar like change management dynamics where at first there was skepticism, and then there was, I think, kind of a reluctant acceptance. And then I think sort of like very enthusiastic acceptance. And I think you touched on the key point that takes someone from hesitancy to acceptance, and it's trust. I think that certainly in medicine there's the Hippocratic oath that doctors all take. First do no harm. I have to protect my patients, and there's a real like deep sense of responsibility. And so I think that like there had to be an evidence hurdle that got cleared that AI would work really well and that they could trust it. And then it's just about making their jobs better. That like once you have trust, it's like, okay, now I feel like I can rely on this. What painful parts of my job is this going to make less painful? And what parts of my job am I going to be able to do better as a result of this? And I think that we're going to see that play out again and again over other parts of biomedicine and the sciences where the proof will have to be in the pudding, and we'll have to do a very rigorous and thorough job at showing that the claims hold up. And then we'll have to show how, again, like being a programmer, we kind of get a little preview of coming attractions relative to the rest of the world. And like, it makes me a better programmer. Like, it's not only like no one has to convince me, they have to convince me to take it away from me because it's such a massive productivity boost. And I think that will be the kind of evidence and kind of capabilities that we'll need to provide writ large across science. Is that it's almost like if you have to have change management, you're doing it wrong. Is kind of like how it feels.
I mean, I think that's a great way of putting it. I guess if you mentioned speed of innovation, you mentioned we could start seeing things roll out at a pace we hadn't seen. I am kind of curious when you think about the research community and things have taken time. I mean, things take time. I mean, even during COVID, we saw, everyone turned their focus onto one solution, things sped up, and we saw a faster cycle of vaccine innovation. You see innovation around new materials. We'll see. Where do you think, in terms of consumer adoption, and the reason I'm asking is typically humans, we take a while for us to want to adopt stuff. I mean, I think hopefully most 95%, 99% of people wear seatbelts, but you still find the outlier of wanting to adopt that safety mechanism in a car. How do you kind of see consumer adoption if we're going to start seeing the innovation at this kind of speed in the future?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so seatbelts are interesting because they're not a product, they're a regulation.
Sure.
It's something that's clearly providing a safety benefit, but it's also something that's mandated, and there may be some, non-trivial population, the fraction of the population that just naturally rebels against that type of thing. I think the future is already here, though, for consumer adoption of AI. It just may not be widely appreciated. So behind the scenes, lots of things are already being handled by AI that's probably only partially understood by the public. So there are entire publicly traded companies who have gotten rid of their human support centers, and you can only interact with an AI-based like support agent. There is no like dialing zero to connect to a human anymore for some support centers. Lots of things that are related to the doing of business are now done by AI. So Salesforce in particular has an entire AI agent team that does a lot of what was traditionally human-led stuff. And so, my sense is that like AI is like the internet. And when the internet came out, you got onto your computer, you dialed up, and you had this very explicit interaction with some type of internet-based technology. We don't really talk about getting on the internet anymore. The internet is the substrate by which all other technologies work and function. And so I think that that's how most people are going to interact with AI in the future, where it's going to be it's going to be in the ether and it's going to be powering lots of things. But you're not going to have this conscious experience of interacting with an AI because it's going to be orchestrating and planning lots of things for you. It's just going to feel like another part of the tech stack, a very important part of the tech stack. But nonetheless, it's going to be much more like atmospheric than it feels right now.
Interesting. I like that viewpoint. I agree with you. I think that is a very good analogy. Andy, I was going to say, I'm sure we have a ton of stuff we can cover. I know we have limited time with you. I really appreciate the fact that you came on and shared with us. If someone does have a follow-up question, maybe someone who's actually in the research community, what is a good way of touching base with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also relatively active on X. So if you want to find me on those platforms, that's probably the best way to reach out.
Okay, fantastic. We'll make sure we link to some of those. And again, thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate the time. That's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think Andy did a great job walking us through where innovation is sitting next to AI and what we're going to see. And the fact that obviously a lot of things are changing behind the scenes. If you're in the research community, you know this. A lot of us don't. So I appreciate Andy coming on and educating us. Please share this with somebody else who might benefit from the conversation. Also like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until then, next time, thank you and goodbye.